Aloha. My name is Jennifer Oyer, and I serve as the founder and chief joy officer of Community Impact Advisors. We are a small boutique nonprofit consulting practice, and really our mission is to support nonprofit organizations and corporations with their philanthropic goals. I am honored today to be here with an esteemed group of representatives that serve our community through their foundations. And I think just in general, the whole morning has been affirming and confirming of what we're going to be talking about today. The topics have been pretty much the same: equity and accessibility, collaboration. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that and the role of philanthropy in healthcare. And I could even go as far to say the power of philanthropy as it plays in healthcare, specifically on Hawaii Island. So I'm actually going to have each of you just share a little bit about yourself and also a little bit about the work that you're doing through your foundations, especially on Hawaii Island as it pertains. Okay, so I will start with Danny.
Aloha mai kako. My name is Danny Leslie, and I am here representing the Roberts Foundation. We are a private family foundation based in West Hawaii. Our wonderful benefactors and homeowners are based in California, but their love for this island, that they come and spend a lot of time, where they spend a lot of their time, they want to give back to this community. We began doing a community assessment back in 2013 and kind of built out our foundation. And we focus on youth in the areas of workforce development, public education, and culture and community.
Aloha, I'm Sean Avendaño. I'm Program Officer at the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation. The Weinberg Foundation has 2 offices, one in Baltimore, Maryland, and one in Hawaii. And our foundation really is guided by our North Star to address poverty in the communities where we work. We provide grants across the state with a centering and focus on our rural and remote communities in the state. Like Congresswoman Takuda shared earlier, rural and remote communities really have that so many strengths, right, that can guide and inform a lot of our work and a lot of our efforts to, in many ways, build back towards what was, follow that blueprint of what was in terms of food production, in terms of community building, but then at the same time don't have access to many of the same resources that our urban communities have. So at the foundation, that's where we center a lot of our work, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion today.
Mahalo, Sean. Aloha, my name is Sulma Gandhi. I have had the blessed privilege of living on Hawaii Island on the east side for the last 25 years and have worked in fields of health, human services, and education, and have raised children who are now 16-and-a-half-year-old twin boys and have also experienced our healthcare system as a community resident. I have had this unicorn opportunity to be on the health, human service, education side, primarily as a grantee for those 25 years in different organizations. And in this role at the Stupski Foundation, now I'm part of the funding philanthropic network. So wanting to take all of that experience as a grantee and some of those challenges as a grantee that we experience and flip that with the Stupski Foundation. And I want to share a little bit about the foundation. I didn't even know who they were 3 years ago. The Stupskis have been part of our Hawaii fabric and communities for several decades, and they supported primarily in partnership with Hawaii Community Foundation in the past. I was one of the first Hawaii staff hired a couple of years ago. And what was unique to me about this organization is that they made this bold decision to close their doors. So we are shutting down the organization by 2029, and the idea is that We really need to shift power back into communities. We need to return the resources into communities. And I'll just leave you with one thing that I just recently learned is that the Stupskis, they had two beloved communities. One was the Bay Area, which is where the our office is located. And the other was Hawaii, because they were residents. They actually owned a home on this island at one point and one on Oahu. Over the course of the last couple of decades, they have given $723 million in their foundation work. And so I feel super grateful to be part of that, facilitating that lineage and that legacy for our communities.
Aloha mai kako. My name is Justina Acevedo Cross, and I'm a program director at the Hawai'i Community Foundation. Our work at the Hawaii Community Foundation is broad across the state, and we have organized ourselves around the change framework. So the change framework representing 6 sectors in Hawaii that we firmly believe need to be in place and successful for both people and place our aina to thrive. And the H in change stands for health and wellness, and I really have the honor to serve as the director of the health and wellness sector of the change framework for the Hawai'i Community Foundation. We've been around for 100 years and have a long history of working in various capacities across our island home. The big idea in what we're working on and working together as a community collective is together we are looking at how do we create shared goals, using that to align with shared resources so that the outcomes are that much more amplified through the work that we're doing. And we do that in a few ways I'm very much looking forward to, because we've been in partnership with others up on this panel, and I'm looking out in the crowd. We've been in partnership with others in this room on some of their health efforts and initiatives. And I wanted to pull up, we've also been on our own equity journey as the Hawaii Community Foundation, so it's just very apropos to be talking about health equity as part of this conversation today.
Thank you. I actually just kind of want to get by show of hands, see who is here. If you work for a nonprofit, would you mind raising your hand just so we can see? Okay, great. What about if you're in government? Okay, great, thank you. Corporate? Any corporate? Okay, great, thank you. Just so we have an idea of who's out there. I want to start our conversation talking about equity and access, if we can. Research by the Blackbaud Institute shows us that donors are increasing their support, in fact, for access to basic health services, mental health, and medical research. Can you share how your foundation is particularly supporting nonprofits and our community to provide equitable and accessible health care across Hawaii Island? Perhaps you can even share a specific project you might be funding here on Hawaii Island. Soma, I'll start with you.
I wasn't expecting that. Okay. Health for me is everything. It is tied to our aina, to our vai, and to one another. And through our foundation, the few issue areas that we focus on are early brain development, food justice, post-secondary success, and serious illness care. And throughout all of that weaves the perspective of access and opportunity so that we can all live to our highest potential of well-being. And knowing, coming from and living on a rural and remote community, that access is very, very difficult and has many challenges. So we look at health equity from the social determinants lens. What are all of the barriers and obstacles that are in place for someone to actually attain that equitable opportunity for their highest form of well-being? One of the examples for our island is that when I was talking about earlier about shifting power to community and shifting the decision-making and trusting the wisdom of our leaders in the nonprofit sectors. We've partnered with, this is across the state, 7 community health centers. One of them is on this island. And they work in all areas of health, not just at the point of care, but they work in all of the upstream areas too. Everything from food to you heard Richard talking earlier about the school-based clinics, to workforce, to transportation. And we have some that are working in the housing area as well, because knowing that in order to actually get the primary care that Linda was talking about earlier, we need to make sure that that's accessible, and we want to focus on prevention.
Thank you. Justina, how about you?
So, as I was mentioning, both equity and access are lenses where we look through our work and see what we can achieve with the community. And we are of the community and with the community to do these projects and work. When I first came into philanthropy, which was about 13 years ago, one thing that stood in my mind was that philanthropy actually means for the love of, I'm changing it to humankind because I prefer that over just saying for the love of man. But it really is that love of each other and that love of what we could do together in a community that I think drives us and drives me in the philanthropic sector. How can we come alongside? How can we be best stewards of funds that we have available, and look across other sectors, working with government, working with business, and working with our nonprofit sector to see what strengths and assets do we each bring to the table. So I wanted to tell you about 2 things, 2 takeaways for what Hawai'i Community Foundation is currently working on related to health and wellness in Hawaii. The first has been around, because we've moved to this way of organizing ourselves in the change framework, which is about shared goals and solutions. Over the last year and a half, we've actually been on a listening tour of talking with people across all different parts of our island home about what does health and wellness look like? What do we want it to look like in Hawaii for 10 years? And I went back to my notes because we were here on Hawaii Island last November doing one of those listening sessions. We've done others virtually. And for the Kona side and Hilo side gatherings that we held, 2 words were used most frequently in describing the health and wellness in Hawaii. The first one was opportunity, which I think is powerful because that's kind of why we're gathered here today. And the second one was actually lacking or limited. And those 2 words are just kind of 2 sides of one coin about what we could be doing together. And so we've taken all that information of what we learned in community, where do we want to be headed as a sector around health and wellness in Hawaii, and that has resulted in a 10-year vision statement for the health and wellness sector. And the emphasis really in that new vision statement is community-led decision-making about health, and also very upstream preventative pieces for health and wellness, determined by people who live in places all around our island home. And then we're working to align our resources, whether that be funding or other kinds of support, to see how can we support that vision statement and moving there in 10 years. It's not going to be an overnight change, but it's a longer-term vision that we can work towards together. And then the second I wanted to bring into the room is Hawai'i Community Foundation has been working for over 6 years on an effort to create a more inclusive mental health system. And what I mean by that is, how do we really include a system that focuses on our infants, toddlers, and their families, and bring them into a fold of mental health that has been primarily designed for our adults. And so that piece has resulted in the Promising Minds initiative, and that has been a really wonderful effort to look at early childhood behavioral health. And when we're talking about infants, toddlers, we're not talking about diagnostics. We're actually talking about preventative work, resilience building in the families, and working with the caregivers of all different kinds, their preschool provider, their aunties, and everyone in the community who could help that child grow and have positive well-being throughout their lifetime. So those are two things that we've been working on, and happy to talk about what we're doing in that space and also some of our partners on Hawai'i Island.
Thank you. Danny, how about you?
Thank you. To answer this question, I'm going to piggyback a little on the entire morning, our first session, as well as what Justina just said. Preparing for this panel, we decided together that community health is our focus. When I spoke earlier about our focus is workforce development, that is, creating access and opportunity for youth for post-secondary education, or for current workers along this Kohala coastline that are currently in their positions, if they want access to that next certification, that next title on their badge to help them build capacity in their life and create access for a living wage. Those are what we deem community health. Things like when I talk about public education, one of our biggest partners, we love to support Teach for America Hawaii, where they place amazing leaders in our school. And having amazing leaders that care for our keiki is what we deem very important for community health, the health and well-being of your child in a school with excellent educators. So now you have excellent education opportunities. Other things that we support are nutritional programs and after-school care. Those are important because, as we know here in Hawaii, some of the biggest barriers are transportation, housing, and childcare. One of our partners addresses two of those, the nutritional meals that are not only sent home with just the child in the after-school care program, but they also send home these hot, nutritious meals to the entire family. If they have a family of 7, they will send that keiki home with 7 hot meals. Those kind of programs is really what speaks to our benefactors and our foundation, and the accessibility and equity into sports. So the preventative measures, as we kind of touched on all morning long and even now, we are kind of, I would say, on that preventative side. That physical education and physical activity are very important for the prevention of health issues. So that's where we focus on primarily.
John, how about you?
Yeah, so I would say that in order to talk about health equity in Hawaii and in Hawai'i Island, we have to talk about how we got here, right? Which is, like many of our speakers said this morning, generations and generations of colonialism and inequity, right? And so when you have that extraction for hundreds of years, it's hard to get to a point where all of us feel healthy and feel like we can feed ourselves and our families and our children and our mo'opuna. And so, for us at Weinberg, the way that we think about health, we think about, like I mentioned earlier, how do we resource community leaders who know the solutions and can show you pictures of how land used to be 100 years ago, and how that helps paint a picture of the food that we need to be putting into our bodies now in order to have us be healthy, right? And so as we think about preventative care, when we think about ways that our communities should be avoiding not falling into these cycles of diabetes and other chronic illnesses, that really starts with, are we in community? Do we feel safe? And what are we putting in our bodies, right? So an example on Hawai'i Island of an organization that's doing incredible work is in Pa'oilo in the Hamakua Coast, Huimau. You go spend and talk some story with Noel Peralta and his wife Haley, and they'll share with you. They'll show you pictures, like I said before, of what that coastline looked like and the food that they were growing, and that their ancestors grew. And they'll show you pictures of how to get back to what that was in a way that integrates, modern culture and practices, because the two are not and cannot be isolated, right? So when we think about health, we think about preventative care. We're really talking about that holistic work across intergenerational culture and knowledge, and then also housing, of course, education. What we're really talking about is stability, right? And so There are just incredible organizations and incredible leaders that are advancing that work, and we at Weinberg Foundation never do any of that in a silo. We try to fund as collaboratively as possible with other people on this sofa and outside of the room.
Well, speaking of collaboration, I want to move into that area, talking about collaborative partnerships. Foundations usually do not face the political constraints that can or may handcuff government. Is there room for foundations and philanthropy to fill in where government cannot? Can foundations fill a gap by increasing capacity of the underrepresented to be heard in the policy process? Anyone want to take that first?
Yeah, I'll start there. That question, when I prepared for this question, when I hear it again today, you're talking about collaborations and partnerships, things I forgot to say. We like to pride ourselves on that. We like to call ourselves trust-based philanthropy. We don't have these hard, rigid rules. We don't have these 27 boxes you have to check, and if you don't check 22 of them, I don't want to talk to you again. We like to build relationships. We like to fill the gaps. So we go out and we love to go see what the community needs. That's taking it back to what I said about the community assessment we kind of continue to do and have done these past few years. We love to go and add in or network and connect with partners and groups that maybe don't quite fit in our mission and vision, but we love to go and take them and be in a meeting and see where they fit elsewhere. Back to filling those gaps. I think it's important for private foundations like ours and other ones here with me today that public-private partnership really can elevate and move the needle on capacity building. You know, I think a lot of what I'm learning is that there's a lot of rules to certain like federal funding and state funding, as we all know. It's almost nice that the feedback we hear from fellow nonprofits is that we give in a more relaxed or unrestricted model, and that really helps them to achieve their goals they want to achieve. Sometimes we're able to help with operational costs. And, you know, I think a lot of the talk has been, oh, we don't fund people. Yes and no. Sometimes you need those people to and fund them to be able to run the programs. One of our programs, there's these 2 leaders of them, and that's what they do. They create this free program for over 700 kids to access. It's a court futsal program, but it's very important. You know, these are these opportunity youth that would never access a club sport, that show up in Crocs or bare feet, that they don't have those kind of things. And so that's where our foundation loves to kind of support, is that capacity and the funding that these smaller groups can't easily access.
To go, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So we learned a lot during the pandemic, right? It feels like we're in a constant whirlwind of crises and disaster after disaster. It's hard to dig ourselves out of it. But during the pandemic, you know, we learned a lot as a community about our own capacity, our strengths as a community, and where there are some deficits, right? And so when all of this CARES Act money, for example, came into our state, into Hawaii, we realized as a community, whoa, do we have the absorptive capacity to even take all of this in? And how do we implement it? And what are all the rules and regulations behind all these federal dollars? Because that money is not free, right? And so what's the role of philanthropy in helping to bridge, to support our community organizations to get those dollars as deep as possible into community? I was talking story with someone the other day who said, a really great insight. She was like, you know, all that federal dollars that are out there, those are our dollars. They belong to us. And they're so hard for us to get. And Hawaii leaves a lot of dollars on the table annually because our community often doesn't have that extra grant writer to apply for that federal grant, or maybe we don't have economy of scale in a rural community. It doesn't look as good on paper if we're only serving 200 people. But we know that in Ka'u, we need that money, right? And so The role of philanthropy, one of the roles that it can play in tapping those federal dollars is helping to provide some of those grant writers, helping to provide some of that technical assistance capacity, helping to inform networks and group approaches to applying for funds so that those dollars really can get deeper and deeper into community.
I really want to concur with what both Danny shared and what Sean shared about sometimes a good role for philanthropy and a collaborative process. I'm a self-prescribed like cross-sector, I don't know what you would say, nerd, I guess, because I think all work really has to happen across the sectors. And just like I'm not a sports person, but I've been watching my son play a lot of soccer these days. And you really have appreciation for different roles that that team members play. And I think all of our sectors are like that, where philanthropy brings some strengths to the table. And there's things that we're actually not so good at, and being humble enough to know what those are. Similar with our government sector, there's many things that they bring to the table that we could, by no stretch of our imagination, bring to the table as philanthropy. And our business community as well. And so I wanted to just kind of build on the themes that have been added and say, in the Promising Minds initiative, which has been around early childhood behavioral health and addressing some of the potential for trauma and early adversity, that has been a really great and exciting model for cross-sector partnership, and also bringing in the element of policy change as part of systems change. So in Hawaii, and this has been across the islands, but I say we have moved from when we started 6 years ago in this work, very new and emerging, Promising Minds didn't have a name. We're kind of going around, this is the children's behavioral health, that's what we're working on. And it was really through both the conversations and that point of moving from inspiration to a point of now we're moving into the perspiration. We have had a couple collective efforts to get some changes made in policy, and that's the perspiration part, make sure that those things are successful and they help provide some of the sustainable efforts. So an example of that, early on in the work of the initiative, we were actually working with a big cross-sector of early childhood providers, all different kinds, home visitors, early intervention, preschool teachers, some of our Hawaiian language medium preschool providers, and some of our family child interaction learning programs, our parent providers. And that was showing the hope, the inspiration, that yes, you could actually change practice and move to something around addressing early adversity. And you don't have to be in the healthcare sector to do that. You can do that in a wide variety of environments where families and children are. Once that piece is in place, it's kind of like a growing flywheel, and it's not enough to stop in that place where practices shift. You actually need to move and shift the system around what's happening to make it a little easier for. Our vision is really that things get easier for children and families who might need to navigate and get services or just have that stronger toolkit around resilience to draw from. So in the policy space, there's been a couple of things. One, starting kind of in a starting small and getting the state to set up a trauma-informed task force. And that was really with this idea of examining what is already underway in Hawaii that's helping in this space from Keiki through Kapuna. And then that became moved into a new policy area where we worked closely with many partners on developing the Office of Wellness and Resilience, which now resides in the governor's office. And the big idea behind that Office of Wellness and Resilience, there's many ideas behind it, but it's to help Hawaii move towards being a trauma-informed state. And that has huge power in this work. We're here, we're here on the healthcare side. And if we can work more upstream, Office of Wellness and Resilience is really set up to work across the inner departments to say, what pieces of work are you doing that's trauma-informed for our families, and how could we better make use of dollars that we have coming in and other things. And I think it's already starting to pay dividends. This is a very young office, right? So two things that are exciting to me about that is they just hired their first staff in January. That's when Tia Hartsock came on board as the director. They have an office now, 6 fully staffed people in the governor's office. And 2 things is with the Promising Minds work, we've looked at federal funding streams. So to talk about things that we maybe leave on the table, we had looked many years at SAMHSA, and they have a great preventative effort through what's called Project Launch, looking at early screenings and referrals, and actually things that can be utilized using federal dollars to set up your system a whole lot better for young kids and their families. We've never been eligible. We never met that high threshold that they had around you have to match these 3 boxes to basically even apply for Project Launch. And because of this collective work over time, and I think even with the installation of the Office of Wellness and Resilience, I'm really proud to say this year Department of Health just got awarded a Project Launch grant, which will bring in $5 million to the state of Hawaii, which is really exciting. So yes, thank you. I mean, it's great news, and great news because that money also will get used back out into the community. I mean, that's the power of working together on policy change. And then with Office of Wellness and Resilience, the other real power is they shifted gears very quickly and got assigned by the governor to be the basically organize the response effort around mental health for West Maui and for Maui. So they're doing that work, and I just am so thankful that we have people in the executive offices who really understand that lifespan need of this community traumatic event that has been experienced, and how we start addressing that small ways, big ways, both short-term ways and long-term ways. So that's why I get pretty excited about the ways we can work across sectors.
Christina, you just talked a little bit about the dollars that Jill Takuda just mentioned this morning about bringing in $17 million for our West Maui response for mental health. And I just want to highlight that that work was done, this is government work, that was done in a 2-week period. And that was part of the cross-sector stakeholder connections that happen. And I think what happens is us as funders, because we talk to so many people, we can become bridges. And we were a bridge in a number of ways for that to happen, because we have grants and organizations that we support in the communities. You mentioned in your question the word handcuffed. You know, the word that comes up for me when I think about government is shackled. And it's interesting because I've worked in the state UH system and also for county government, and completely understand those restrictions, and as a grantee getting federal funds, all those check boxes that you were talking about. So I resonate with the trust-based philanthropy, and we have that ability to completely transform that, because we don't have to do that. So we can make, those are decisions that we can make internally around that. But I actually almost want to ask Doug the question around how does philanthropy partner best with government in that way. And I can say that from my experience, because we have relationship with the County of Hawaii, our foundation, we talk almost on a weekly basis. I'm hearing about a number of things that are happening in the community. I'm always getting updates on what they're doing. They have funding mechanisms as well. And how can we be that bridge that I was talking about earlier, so that we can partner together to have that government, non-government partnerships, not just between a foundation and the government, but with all of our other nonprofits as well. I want to bring up an example also around policy that impacts Hawaii Island. One of the things that our foundation was requested to do and asked by our state government, MedQuest, was for some support to create a benefit around our palliative care, home-based palliative care. And so we've been on that journey with MedQuest as a supporter, as they have worked towards going up to CMS to get that home-based palliative Medicaid benefit on the books. And we're hopeful for that for next year. But just because something is on the books with policy, which to me is about systems and potentially some form of sustained funding, we still have to make sure that you can implement it, right? So we're partnering also with Hawaii care choices to support them as they uplift their palliative care support for the community so that they can actually implement. Because just because it's on the books doesn't mean it can happen. So those are examples of how that thread went from government with foundation work to right down to nonprofit, and our wish and dreams for what could be possible from that.
This isn't a prepared question, but I was thinking, because there's so many nonprofits in the room, do you all encourage other nonprofits to work collaboratively together when seeking funding?
Yeah, I can chime in on that. It is something we encourage, but it also needs to come with the potential to do that, right? There's actually, one of our nonprofit leaders a couple years ago, she said to me, man, those dollars to like hold our network together, those are the hardest dollars to get, and they're the hardest dollars to keep. And I've always tucked that away in the back of my head because I think those are things that if we can provide those through like general operating support and just mechanisms that allow for collaboration versus very project-based outcomes, that has real benefit to the community. So we just launched over the summer, based off of what we heard around health and wellness in Hawaii, a new grant program called Health and Wellness Grants. Sorry, not a very creative name. But what we were doing in those grants is that there was two opportunities kind of rolled into one. One was a collaboration grant that people could apply for with other nonprofits or partners. They didn't necessarily have to be nonprofits, but this was really driving home the idea of we want community-led ideas to bubble up. And then the second was we heard really loud and clear, it's very hard to sometimes tap into or even start to get philanthropic dollars. I'm running a really good program. It's small. It's me and I have a handful of volunteers. We wanted to intentionally find a way to begin to resource some of those organizations with great ideas, things that might be a little risky. They don't have all the outcomes there, but they're doing very embedded work in their own communities around health and wellness. So we provided a second option, which was a seed grant, which is small, like $5,000 kind of startup or money just to get something going. And it also helps build that relationship so we learn a little bit more about what they're doing and they can learn a little bit more about us at the Hawai'i Community Foundation. So this month will be the month that we're announcing those grantees and those partners, and I'm really hopeful that next year when I'm able to come back to this, I'll have something to share and maybe be in one of the sessions with some of our grantee partners on that work.
Want to share anything?
Just a quick example of our work in that space. So like I'd mentioned earlier, and you mentioned so well, just like the power of networks of organizations to collectively tap federal funding sources and help lift our whole field, right? I think like we're in a funding ecosystem in which funders have historically and continue, because this is the way the system is set up, to make nonprofits compete against each other, right? And what's often lost in that system is that the people who are in the community who ultimately are trying to do their best to succeed and live a healthy life, but oftentimes our funding systems actually make it so that nonprofit organizations become more siloed, right? They have to show a competitive advantage or what makes you better than the other organization, et cetera. And so, like Sulma mentioned, like we have an advantage in philanthropy where we can try to restructure that whole mindset, at least when you're interacting with our organization, around, okay, how is this one grant helping to lift our whole field of work? How is it helping to lift our nonprofit ecosystem working to address food insecurity, for example? And so we provided a grant or multiple grants to Hawaii Good Food Alliance, which is an organization that really is a network of multiple community-based healthcare organizations, FQHCs, and other nonprofit food hubs across the state, with the notion of, hey, if all of us come together and we actually have capacity to have a facilitator, an executive director, paid staff that drive all of our organizations towards shared goals, then maybe we'll be able to actually succeed in this very daunting task that is addressing food insecurity and food access, especially in rural communities. And what we've seen is, I mean, the incredible impacts of that just a couple of years in, where Hawai'i Island was a successful applicant to a USDA grant of over $30 million to be a hub for food resilience for all non-continental US territories and states, where Hawai'i Island is that hub and is that model. And so there's so many examples of that where we're asking this question, how is the whole field being lifted by this individual organization's work?
Any other thoughts?
This might be an answer of all the three first questions put together, because my nerves are setting me back 3 questions. But as my friends here speak, you asked about projects that we've supported that speak to what our topic is today, if we encourage nonprofits to work together. So 2 things. What I learned from our previous director was, there's a lot of people doing the good work, and you almost want them to, hey, go talk to so-and-so. You guys are doing the same thing, and really want to, because they're all doing the good work, but they're all kind of fighting for the same funding. And so you kind of want to encourage them to work together. But with, speaking of West Hawaii specifically, where we focus, it's small, and sometimes it's, oh, I don't want to work with that guy, or, oh, we tried, and sometimes it doesn't work. So we don't heavily encourage that. Do we try? Absolutely. But sometimes it doesn't, and you gotta, build those relationships and then help them to foster other relationships. A project, now that I can think a little longer on it, things they said really brought it to light. A project I was proud to be a part of in my, just these past few years, again, being new to philanthropy, we got to partner with Frank and Laura Sayer Foundation. This is a project they had for years and years and years in the making. And they came to speak in my office to us about 2 years ago. I had to take the meeting because our director was busy, jury duty. And so I take this meeting, and this husband and wife, I just was like so, and I don't even enamored's the word. I was just they were like my parents or my grandparents. I don't mean to call them grandparents, but they were just so loving, and this 30-minute, 1-hour meeting that I got thrown into in my first few years of being in philanthropy, I'm like, okay, what is this about? And I just, that turned into 2.5 hours, and just their passion, their love, and their determination to get a new County of Hawaii Fire Department helicopter was so important to them because of their life experiences, and it just touched on, our hearts. And, my director comes right back in at the end of this 2.5-hour meeting, and it was just set that we knew we wanted to support them. And thanks to our amazing and generous benefactors, they said yes, no questions asked, to going in on the brand new County of Hawaii helicopter, the Ka'io, that just got blessed last month. That was a real fun part for us to be invited to be a part of that project. And what we always like to say is, it's the nonprofit, it's those foundations that really do all the hard work. And all it takes is for them to come talk to us, tell us their story, build that trust. And it was a yes. And it was, those kind of things, is they're the heroes. And we just have a little bit easier job, if I want to call it that, where we just got to say yes. We believe in what you do. And it's these nonprofits that are really bridging the gaps and building the relationships, where it makes it very easy for us to be like, absolutely want to support you. So that was a fun project to be invited on.
Mahalo from the community. Yeah. What came up for me about that, and I was astonished to learn. I've always known we've had a lot of nonprofits on the island. When I started back in the late 90s working a nonprofit here, there was maybe 500 at the time. We have about 1 nonprofit per 200 residents. Are you validating that? You know that?
I know that there's about 7,000 nonprofits in Hawaii.
Yeah, so through Hano, I was able to get their chart. That's a lot of nonprofits. And when you think from the perspective of every nonprofit that needs to have these volunteer or generally volunteer board of directors, and then they have a CEO and then a CFO, and all of the different operational needs, that might not be the most efficient way. We have a very loving community We have, I heard 205,000 population on this island. And that's why we have all these nonprofits, because of that passion, the aloha, and that visioning. But I think about how difficult it is for these nonprofits to survive and to keep trying to get the multiple sources of funding, and in this competitive crab in the bucket scarcity mindset that has been set up through all kinds of historical structures, and to think about, well, how do we need to move so that we can shift to a sense of abundance. And so I love working with organizations that have multiple partners already embedded. So, Community First this is what they do. They're trying to de-silo and bring together a number of organizations. There are organizations that receive actually quite a bit in healthcare, quite a bit of dollars through different mechanisms, and they have 100 contracts out to other nonprofits in their surrounding community that also takes care of their patients. So there's already the sense of the collaboration that's built in. I wanted to share one other example that is a collaboration on many levels. One, that there's a number of funders, probably about 3 or 4 funders that are involved in this. And it's taking place in Pahoa and also in Waimanalo. And it's around the early readiness, childhood, like a continuum. So that how do we know that our kids are ready to learn by the age of 5 when they actually get into DOE school, and all of the health and wellness structures that need to happen before that. And we're also partnering with county government on that. So all of the different partners to try to figure out how do we de-silo and create agreements between a number of these different organizations who care about the communities.
Yeah. I want to move into talking about innovation and creativity, working with nonprofit organizations. How might we, or you, foundations, encourage innovation and creativity with regard to philanthropy and healthcare? Anyone want to start off? Danny? Okay.
Back to, again, what we're all talking about, and again called our foundation specifically about this community health, and that's kind of what I get from Soma. We kind of, I always take that question as we kind of get to be the creative ones. This is just how I'm interpreting this question. When I or we at the foundation go and kind of seek out our partners and see what they're doing, whether we hear them in the news or did you hear so and so. I think we talked about that earlier. It's like the way to collaborate and get to know each other is just to tell the next person, and that kind of telephone model, word of mouth. So when we speak to our partners and hear what they're doing, sometimes the nonprofits are many years in, sometimes they're brand new, sometimes they're big, staff of 6 to 20. Sometimes very grassroots. There's 2 of them doing everything front to back. And when they present to us and we open up to them, like, what does your work look like? What do you feel you need? What is the needs you feel in your line of work? And sometimes they're like, oh, we're doing this program, and they're so focused on their 1 or 2 programs and they're doing them excellent. And I said, well, what's the next step? Are you able to increase in capacity? Are you able to reach, you said you have 12 kids in this pilot. Are you able to go to 24 kids, 36 kids, or whatever the program or project might be? I said, do you have the capacity to expand? Sometimes a yes and a no. And when they say no to us, I said, well, what do you want it to look like? Because, oh, we have this budget. And for me, budget for me is the other way around. I said, no, budget as in, what do you want it to look like? Not the monies you've already been rewarded or the monies you have pending from other grants. What do you want it to look like? Build out your dreams. So it's like, when you talk about creativity and innovation, sometimes these nonprofits are working so hard to do the work, boots on the ground, or the most recent thing I saw was, I think it was like slippers on the aina. It's leading up to this Hanukkah, I believe. They call it like slippers on the ground or slippers on the aina. They're so focused on doing the work every day, Sometimes they don't have time to dream of the next step and where they're going. So I always like to open it up, whether I'm allowed to or not. Sorry, bosses, but I open it up to them and I say, what do you want it to look like? And you tell us what you want it to look like, and let's work that way versus I think you're right here in this bucket. It's only me. I have to fight for these little fundings. So when I hear that question, to me it was at our foundation, we love to open it back up to them and let them be creative and tell us exactly what they would like to look like and filter them out or help them to network to get where they want to be if it happens to not be us.
I'm curious if the change framework has allowed for more innovation and creativity. Have you seen more innovative proposals come through to HCF through the change framework?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was thinking about the innovation piece, I was thinking it actually builds on what Danny had just shared a little bit, in that we actually, I think as individuals and collective in the community, like, we're infinitely creative people. And sometimes it's just a matter of unleashing it. And so for like how I see my job is, it's actually my job as a program director at a philanthropic, at a foundation, to ask the more beautiful question. So to ask like the what if questions, the dreaming questions, the where are we going questions, the questions in multiple years, and then seeing how we can basically work backwards from there to see how we could get there. In the change framework, we have seen a lot of creative, creative proposals, but one that came to mind is just one that we've been working on over the last year. Lots of creative, I think a lot of creativity just when you let people share what, in their own words, what they are dreaming up, what they're seeing as their needs for their community, and letting that be the leader and the teacher. So one example from that work is here on Hawai'i Island. The community in the early childhood health space has had this long-term kind of thinking, like, it would be great to get more activated around like our clinicians and healthcare providers in infant early childhood mental health. And that was kind of a dream that kept getting put out there. Nobody knew where to start with that. So we said, well, let's just see how we can start. And honestly, starting is just in the relationship space, right? Like, who's interested? What's going on already? And it was so powerful because one of the first organizations that raised their hand and said, we're interested in this, we don't really know what it's totally going to look like at our organization, was Hawai'i Island Community Health Center. And Hawai'i Island Community Health Center then created this really wonderful plan to look at, as they were implementing their EPIC program, the EPIC electronic records, which was new for them, that at the same time they would roll out across their 14 clinics. Any family doctor or any pediatrician would do this revised protocol, screening all the children that came through to those well child checks with ages and stages SE, and also maternal health screeners. And then what's really cool about this is that they wanted to see the data back and have it in-house. So they built out a module as part of their electronic record system for that ages and stages screener. And what it means, so it's kind of the power of like what could be replicated down the road, is any community health center in Hawaii who's using the EPIC system could have this module basically put into, if they want to do the same thing of doing these screenings of how our kids are looking, are they socially, emotionally developing on track, do they need any extra support? Those are the kinds of things that the ages and stages questionnaire would tell us. And it's that infinite creativity of the team from Hawai'i Island Community Health Center who said, we don't totally know how to do this, but we want to plan on doing something, and we're working on it. And we said, that's like the kind of stuff we want to partner with you guys on.
When I think about creativity and innovation, I think about breaking rules, and that brings something forth for me because I'm an agitator by nature. And we're breaking rules because the status quo is not working. And oftentimes the status quo when we're thinking about equity and justice is because of the discrimination and all of the isms that we've historically experienced in our communities, for sure, on this island have experienced. So we do similarly. I made a decision as soon as I came onto this role. I will never put out an RFP. I've written to enough RFPs. I've given out RFPs when I was in county government, because those are the rules and restrictions that we have to abide by. But those aren't the rules and restrictions, and we can break those rules within our organization. So most of it was from community-driven knowledge and wisdom on the community knowing what's best for itself and how that solution or implementation can be implemented, and how we might be able to support and partner on that. One of the, when I talked earlier about shifting power from funders to the community, like technically I should be accountable to a CEO and a board, but I really feel accountable to my community. And most of our organizations, they have board structures as well, but what they're doing, they're accountable to their community. And that's where I think about from decision making and where the power needs to reside. So one of the things that we are starting to experiment on, which will happen on this island and also Maui, and then eventually Kauai, is around participatory decision making on resources, on funding that are in support of families who have children prenatal to the age of 8, and building out a decision-making process of families who are living with young children and experiencing obstacles in their communities to be able to make decisions on those dollars. Like, why am I making those decisions on those dollars and those resources? So we're going to be partnering with the County of Hawaii, we're partnering with the County of Maui. We're starting with those two communities, and we'll be starting to work around a process. So this is creativity and innovation in a design of how funders can partner with the community and how nonprofits can interact as well. And I am sitting with a number of funders here and hoping that at some point they want to co-fund as well.
That's great.
Wink, wink.
Sean, did you want to share?
Sure, yeah, I can go really fast. Yeah, echo everything that's been said, and loved your point, Danny, around like what innovation often is for our community-based organizations is just having space to breathe. And then once you have space to breathe, that all these ideas and possibilities come out, right? And so, I keep looking over at Brandy Menino in the corner and our partnership with Hope Services, and thinking about, when Brandy calls and says, hey, look, like we might be able to tap this 1115 Medicaid waiver, but like we're gonna be figuring it out, and we just need a pool of revolving capital internally to try to figure it out. And then maybe once we do that, we'll have actually a playbook for other organizations to try to copy us. And so we're lifting our whole field. And it's like, great, let's do that. Like, that's what innovation looks like, right? It's not just, maybe it's helping to support one organization, one model that can inform a whole field of work and help to resource our whole sector.
Well, we have a number of questions, and thank you for the questions. The first one we've kind of talked about. I mean, it's the R word that comes up often in philanthropy, which is relationships. It's all about relationships. So this question is, as a healthcare facility, what tips can you provide when we seek funding from sponsors and donors? What is the best approach to take? Anyone want to go first?
I was pausing on that question just in part because I don't feel like there's a one approach to take on that front. I guess one piece of that is thinking about what kind of funding is available. I think it is really helpful for organizations to know themselves well. I mean, just like how we as we get older ourselves, right? It's like having that sense of self is like a really important core. It's something you can draw from during the pandemic or when there's something that's really not going right in your community. Organizations are very similar in that if you can know your core of being, that might translate to your mission statement, but I think it's even bigger than your mission statement. It's kind of your ethos, it's kind of your way of working, it might be your principles, and that letting that be your guide even around what kind of funding or what kind of relationships or what kind of ways of working you're seeking. So that's, I think, knowing that and your origin story. I mean, Hawaii Community Foundation, we've actually done some exploratory work of like, what is our own origin story? We've been around for 100 years. We look really different now with a team of 75 people than we did when we first started, and we actually started inside a bank, right? And also reckoning with that past history. So I think knowing your origin and knowing kind of who you are as a core to your organization can be very, very helpful in that relationship building piece. I'm sorry if that doesn't feel like an answer to like what, any tips exactly what to do, but I do feel like knowing yourself kind of applies to organizations as well.
Use the word relationship, and in the funder world, in the past, it was always about return on investment, like the funders are investing in something and what is the impact from that. And it's really around return on relationships. And if there's a value alignment between the organization and trying to confirm what that is. Generally, there could be a value alignment, but it's really trying to bring that forth. This question sounded like it came from, you said healthcare facility, so then what came up for me in comparison, and I don't know if it's in comparison or not, to a nonprofit, for instance. Healthcare is complicated from and everybody knows this here, from a fiscal perspective, from a funding perspective. And so one of the things I'm consistently thinking about is, where is the opportunity for sustained funds? Does an infrastructure need to be built, like a policy, for those sustained funds to come in? What's going to happen after a funder funds for a short period of time, and then what? And I have to think about that because we're closing our doors. So I'm not thinking about 50 years, that we'll be able to be in partnership for 50 years. I'm thinking from the perspective of what are the steps that need to happen so that this organization can have and create that sustained fund. And that could be through funder organizing. It could be trying to figure out, is the easy way to try to get the check written right now, or is there another billable way that this needs to happen that might need to be connected to policy? And we're working on a number of different, our fingers are sort of involved in a number of different policy type ideals. We talked about community health workers this morning, right? That was brought up. And I'm just thinking about, how do we get those probably most important professionals in our healthcare organizations to get properly paid and funded? What are the structures that need to be in place? And I'm not sure philanthropic dollars, they'll just be band-aids for short periods of time versus what we need to do to get that sustained and actually value that work.
Yeah, it's, completely agree, and would say, just as another tip, I suppose, building on that is, where does your organization fit within like the broader landscape of work, and just helping to paint that picture of what that looks like for your organization, and then exactly, it's like just knowing that a lot of the time, and look, every foundation is very different, and every philanthropic family or entity is very different in their mission and goals and ways that they operate. And at the same time, to Sulma's point, like what philanthropy is looking for is how is this individual grant going to help to push something that's going to help to change the field, and how is this grant going to push to support your organization to be able to do this type of work more and more down the line. So it's not just one individual grant, it is really building that relationship and thinking about the longer term repercussions and benefits.
I might also add too on a fundraiser's end. I've been in fundraising for 20 years, and for a fundraiser, one, you have to do your research before you contact the funder. But also, I have never been turned down when I called a funder and said, hey, can I ask you a question about this project that we have? Or can I get your thoughts on something? So I would say also reach out to the funders and just have a talk story with them, because I guarantee you, one, they won't say no to you if you just want to learn more about the organization and what they fund specifically. Okay, next question. Are there resources you provide or would recommend to help nonprofits serving rural areas? Are there resources you provide or would recommend to help nonprofits serving rural areas?
One organization, I know they're a nonprofit or organization themselves. We utilize Hano a lot to just, hopefully I'm answering this question. We use Hano a lot to get a lot of information what's going on. So a lot of nonprofits, typically the ones that are just starting out, that kind of reach out to me, knowing me from the community, friends of friends or so, say, well, how do I get going? Like, I just got my 501c3, what now? And for myself at the foundation, I don't quite have that capacity yet to like know exactly all my resources. I've been building them over the past few years. But my initial to always tell them is check out Hano real quick. Just check out, they have a lot of awesome resources. And then some other things I've been reading on lately is they talk about, I love the acronym CBO, so community-based organizations. I kind of encourage them like, hey, well, you know so-and-so, go talk to them. I kind of just encourage them to talk to each other. The more you talk about what you're doing and what you want to do, so many other people, again, back to this morning's message, is it's all word of mouth. I'm gonna take it all the way back to what I first said when I was the first to grab the mic. I had to do a community assessment. I'm born and raised in Holualoa here in Kaluakona. I went to public high school, I went off to college, and I came back. And when I got pulled into this philanthropy world, my previous director said, hey, do a community assessment, figure out who's doing what. How do you do that? Go talk to people, look it up on this website. Okay. I was like, yeah, I know that person. That person's doing what? What are they doing? I was like, they were in my third grade class. There's no way they're doing that. I didn't know that. It was really cool to see. And I was in this brand new job, didn't know what the heck I was doing. And I was like, be like a baby Oprah or something. This is awesome. But you realize how awesome your community is and how hard these people work to make it run. Because sometimes it does come down to these private entities, these small little nonprofits to do the work. If I can take it back to the education component, I keep talking about, a good friend of mine, was my mom's really good friend, Dave Honma said the key to opportunity is education. This conference is an education opportunity for myself in the foundation, like the importance of healthcare, and what we're doing may not be absolutely direct funding to healthcare, but it's that community health that I talked about, that we like to consider ourselves, our work that we're doing, and you realize that it's all interconnected and it's all very important. Again, us just being funders is one thing. The work that these partners we choose to partner with, the work they're doing, back to the hero statement, they are the heroes and they're the ones working hard. And that's my train of thought. I forgot what the initial question was, but that's, yes.
Rural reporting.
So that's a really broad, big question, so I'm going to have a very short answer here. I feel like all of the work I've ever done has been in rural and remote. I don't have enough details based on that question, so this is an invitation, whoever wrote that question, if you want to have a 30-minute brainstorm, I would love to hear more about what you're thinking about so that I can help share resources or connections.
Yeah, that's a great answer, and definitely find Soma afterwards. So the one piece I was going to add is I grew up in Hawaii and then did the boomerang thing, went away to the continent for college and then returned home. although albeit a few years later than I thought I would be. And during the time that I lived in California, I worked at the David and Lucille Packard Foundation and had a chance to do funding nationally across the country. And actually, that work helped solidify why this work here at Hawaii Community Foundation is so important to me right now. Because when I was working there and being part of some of the national conversations, I was in conversations where national funders just did not want to look at any parts of the country where it was too small of numbers to make any sense around innovating things. And I think that's a really big mistake on the philanthropic sector side, and I feel really comfortable saying that. So in all the work that I do through Hawaii Community Foundation, the initiatives we're working on around health, I'm asking the question around how is this serving our rural and remote communities. I'm really proud of like some successes we've had, for example, through the Promising Minds Initiative. Every year, which started during the pandemic, we've held the Hawai'i Summit, which is a trauma-informed summit for anyone in the early childhood space who wants to learn more. And we've held that initially virtually because of circumstance, because of the pandemic. But even when there was opportunity to be more opened up, what we saw in the data was we were having over half of the participants coming from our neighbor islands and participating, and we didn't want to lose that because they could get Department of Human Services credits for coming that might not have been available in their community. And now we're bringing that same Hawai'i Summit basically on the road and starting something called Hawai'i Live, which is going to different communities and actually having the community organizations help lead what that in-person, maybe smaller gathering looks like. And I think those are the kinds of things. So it's about like networking in this space. But I will just say, I guess it left a bad taste in my mouth that some conversations at the national level were basically dismissive of philanthropic funding for rural communities, that I have made it one of my missions to not do that.
And just really briefly, I think the stat from, I think it's an old stat, but it was at, like in 2018 that nationally only 6.4% of all philanthropic dollars go to rural communities, something along those lines. So when we're talking about resources in rural communities in terms of financial, they're slim. And so it's all of our kuleana to help to do that funder mobilizing when we see a really important opportunity. A lot of people in this room might know the Weinberg Foundation. We have a 30-year history. When I joined the foundation 4 years ago, we looked at our books and saw where our dollars were going in community and saw that 80% of our dollars annually in grant making were going to Oahu and 20% to neighbor islands. And over the last 4 years, that number has flipped. It's about 20% of our grant making dollars on Oahu and about 80% in rural and remote communities across the state. So, just acknowledging, look, this is where there's a big challenge. This is where there's not as easily an access to resources. And so this is where we need to be if our mission is to address poverty.
Well, you can hold on to the mic, Sean. This is for you. Generally, we have been told that the Weinberg Foundation likes to assist with finishing a project versus starting or mid-funding on a project. Has that changed?
Yeah, great question. So when I started at the foundation 4 years ago, it was a part of our foundation's a part of our journey to become really one foundation that has two offices, like I mentioned at the top of the conversation, one in Baltimore and one in Hawaii. And so a lot of those practices since those 4 years ago have shifted, and we've gotten a lot more flexibility and support from our board to really focus on that big R relationship, really focus on relationship within community, within our values, within community's values, and then have the conversation from there as to what possibilities are. And so, yes, I have been told especially when I started, I was told the rules of Weinberg funding, community knew it way more than I did. We come to you for the last 30%, we have to have 50% raised, and we have to, that conversation has kind of shifted. Our doors are open. You can email, you can call, and we can talk story. That doesn't mean that every call I get is obviously a funding opportunity and there's like alignment, but it means that like what you'd mentioned before, what Sula mentioned, like we're always open to have a conversation around possibilities and connection points.
Thank you. This one is pretty general. Do you have to be a 501c3 to be eligible for a grant? I guess it's with.
Fine. I'll be real quick. No, you don't have to be a 501c3. We've funded local education organizations, so schools, and actually there's a wide variety of tax codes that we can fund. So if you want to know more about that, happy to share. And also I think it's very important the role that fiscal sponsor organizations can play in this ecosystem of community work. So just thinking, and we haven't always been good about how we can have the fiscally sponsored projects and things apply, but we're trying to learn and get better at that.
Yeah, it's all about breaking rules, but staying within the law. So it's not just 501c3s. There's lots of public, government, non-government partnerships that can happen. Generally not funding for-profit organizations. They're usually community-driven, based in service of community in our issue area is how we do that.
And for our foundation as well, yes, 501c3 is where we like to give our support to. There are case-by-case special initiatives and issues that are important to our benefactors that we may have a conversation about, but typically, yes, for us, a 501c3.
Thank you. Okay, these are more program project related. This one says, I see many nonprofits receiving a lot of funding but are not improving health. How can we improve or reallocate resources appropriately? I see many nonprofits receiving a lot of funding but are not improving health. How can we improve or reallocate resources appropriately?
I'll just say briefly, it gets to the earlier conversation from today around sale plans. And so when community has and multiple stakeholders have, shared metrics of success, and I think it becomes a lot easier for all of our community and for funders, et cetera, to allocate those dollars appropriately to community's vision of what success looks like. And so maybe this is a non-answer, but that is like really important when we think about, what funding decisions all of us as funders, government, and philanthropy make.
So it was a bit of a general question because what is improving health mean? And it can mean different things to different organizations and to different people. And I remember earlier this morning, I can't remember who said it, so someone will remind me that, the success would be that somebody doesn't go to the ER, that it's through primary care. Linda's gone. It was through, the primary care that happened. So what is unless we're connected and integrated and de-siloing our work and working in collaboration and moving away from this competitive, unfortunate nature of how our healthcare system is set up and the ways that we can buck the system and do that on our own, that is going to be the way, I think, forward in terms of being able to determine if those health improvements are happening.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add, or one thought that came to mind hearing the question, because it's hard to respond to without maybe the more concrete example about it. I think also the outcomes that we're seeking, sometimes they're not very observable, especially initially. And so if we're looking for the immediate wins, that sometimes you just need to have the patience and the long-term view on like what are some maybe intermediate things you could look at. And a real example of that, I work quite a bit in the prenatal through 5 space. A lot of the benefits are not actualized till years and years later. But you can look at things like, you can look at their connectedness, the bonding between a parent, caregiver, and a child. There's measures you can look at for that. So that is immediate. But you can also look at longer term things, readiness for kindergarten, like across some social domains, across some domains that more equate to academics. And I think all that we can, the more, and a lot of us up here focus upstream on wellness, kind of wellness measures, and so committing to it's a long-term view around it. So I don't know if that helps to answer. I'm kind of pondering that question a little bit more. Thank you.
Okay, we kind of touched upon this, but how can a nonprofit with a strong program or good idea present it to your organization?
Talk story style is what we always like to say. This might even kind of semi-answer what we were talking about, the funding, how do we get to shift towards the healthcare? What came to my mind immediately, again, me being new, but kind of hearing what's been going on, it comes down to just ask. Even though I started my presentation today with, we're workforce development, which is huge, right, broad, and we focus on youth. Public education, are we giving monies direct to the DOE? Maybe not always. Once you give them money to something like a huge entity like that, a lot of rules are constrained on that money or put on that money. And then back to community and culture. So to answer that question, short story long is how I operate, is just ask. Even if it's something we or a foundation hasn't given to before, just like other funders, as things happen, unfortunately sometimes catastrophes and disasters, funders, I think it's our duty and our job to pivot with the times and with what's going on right now, just like the Maui relief efforts. I think a lot of funders shift and pivot to what's going on. Maybe not always, but never hurts to ask, hey, what about this? Because we always talk about, it is interconnected somehow, and you never know what that conversation could lead to. So I would just ask a funder. It's not quite on your website. It's not quite about what you spoke about at the conference. What do you think about this? I just ask.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and this is pretty specific with regard to a program. Are there any projects geared towards mental health services for children and adolescents on Hawaii Island?
I can start with that one. And I'll also start with a lot of that ground, the starting ground point for the Promising Minds initiative was exactly rooted in this, like how do you support positive mental health in the early years, a part that hasn't been as well focused on previously. And both Weinberg Foundation and Stupski Foundation were like fairly early partners in the Promising Minds initiative, saying like, yes, this is something we should focus on. And it also helped to track other funding coming from like national funders, which is powerful. That was another thing we haven't quite talked about yet, is that it can also, by setting up something that has a focus, like early childhood mental health, it can provide different funders coming in that have that as an interest area, but don't necessarily always fund in Hawaii. And so resources came in from also places like Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to do that kind of funding. We started actually one of our first communities of practice around early childhood mental health and trauma on East Hawaii Island. And so it was made up of all different kinds of early childhood program providers, as far like down south part, and even we had family, they changed their name, West Hawaii. What is their new name? Family Services Hawaii, thank you. So Family Services Hawaii would come over across the island also to join us, but a lot of those were rooted around Hilo. And really what that was about is like, how do you change your practices inside whatever program you are, whether you're a home visitor that's going out and meeting with parents in their home and like really coaching them in practices, how are you noticing, like, and if it's if you're thinking maybe there's a developmental delay, maybe there's something going on that's actually more of a trauma trigger, and seeing how you might be supportive of that family. Or in their space, many of the programs actually, as they were in the community practice, they changed what their physical space looked like. So creating things like a calm corner that kids could go to and have like a sensory experience to just calm their mind, calm their body down. And so there's wonderful organizations who are very well practiced in that all across East Hawaii Island, and groups like PACT, and then also the YWCA of Hilo, Ka'umeki Ka'eo, which runs a Hawaiian language immersion pre-K program. They all are part of our mental health system that's really working with keikis. They're frontline, and then there's a system getting built around them about where could they refer to, right, if there's something that's more needed. And that would be where other partners and clinicians, social workers come into play. Hopefully that gives you some example. You guys have amazing resources here on Hawaii Island.
I've been working in the mental health peripheral field for over the 2 decades while I've been on Hawaii Island. I train in suicide prevention, and so I'm not sure if the question is more on the intervention side or on the prevention side. There are many organizations in here who have mental health providers within their organizations that are supporting the community. So that does exist. We also know that we have a deficit in our provider space when it comes to mental health as well. So there's a lot of bridges that need to happen from a workforce perspective, but also what are our possibilities if we can support the prevention part? If we are working more with our school systems and supporting the prevention in mental health, so it doesn't get to a stage of intervention needs. So thinking about that with a number of the partnerships that we have in our communities to be able to do that.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of the questions, but just want to thank all of you for joining us. I really appreciated the conversation that we had about the role of philanthropy in healthcare. Thank you to Justina, Soma, Sean, and Danny for your time and lending your thoughts and expertise to our conversation today. And thank you all so much for joining us.